thank you all for being here. Thank you for this film.
Thank you.
Yeah. I want to start by asking you about research from I guess a few different angles. But first, I mean, there are many films that take on research and even uncovering conspiracies as their subjects, but they tend to almost always externalize that process through some maybe more conventional forms of action, like there's a heist or there's a chase, something like that. But your film is almost entirely resisting that. It is, for most of the film, we're entrenched in the process of research itself, of reading, of forming connections, pulling together different sources. So my first question is how did it become clear to you that this process alone was the film?
Yeah, I honestly think it kind of started with what could be considered a bad idea, actually, which was that we love research montage scenes in films. It's there are a lot of fade-ins and fades-outs, and they're in the library, and the candlestick is burning down, or the lights are going out. It's so fun. We love that stuff, and we were like, but what if that was the whole movie? And definitely, arguably, not a good idea, because there's a reason they montage through those things. But it was the badness of the idea that was kind of appealing, because it's can you take something that seems ostensibly uncinematic or possibly tedious and turn it into cinema that can hopefully entertain? I'm sure some of you were not, but...
I would just add that it was definitely something that we had very early on that we knew we wanted to prioritize, but it definitely was informed by our own research process of this conspiracy theory and these various primary sources, and just how much fun is maybe not the right word, but how much we got sucked down that rabbit hole, and that became our journey long before it ever became Beatrice's journey. And so as we were just getting deeper and deeper, it became clear that actual process was what we were interested in, and hopefully interested in conveying to the audience.
Yeah, so I guess in case it's not clear to everyone here, Father Ernetti is a real figure, and he did actually claim to have invented this device, the Chronovisor. So when did you guys stumble on this conspiracy, this information about this device, or Ernetti, and when did, or what was the tipping point of it being a thing that was intriguing to something that was actually compelling you to research deeper and eventually build a film around?
Well, Kevin found the conspiracy first, so maybe you can start with how you came across it.
Yeah, I was reading this book called Angels, Archons, and Aliens. That's this huge tome about exotheology, which is religion as it relates to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And there were obviously the book is kind of for crackpots, and there were a lot of diversions in it, and there was a 10-page stretch that was called Father Ernetti's Chronovisor. And we've always been interested in the religious and spiritual. We've always been interested in genre film, and I just liked the word Chronovisor when I saw it. And so I read it, and it was this crazy interview with him that obviously has all these startling facts and claims, and I immediately sent it to Jack and was like, this is so interesting. Wouldn't it be cool if we had $50 million and did an international mystery film about this story? And yeah, Jack talked me back from that. But I don't know, what then inspired
Well, and then there was a brief period where it was just a short film. So the final 10 minutes of the film was something that Kevin sort of I think just felt compelled to make a version of that, sort of as a standalone idea of just what would it be like to actually experience and interface with this device. And I think that was for a decent amount of time all we thought we could do with it, with the budget.
It didn't really work, and it was kind of dissatisfying. We were like, I wish we could return to this Chronovisor idea, because that short, had some interesting visuals, but it wasn't cohering in a way that was satisfying for us. So the idea kept coming back to us. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we had, all this was going on while we were sort of continuing down the rabbit hole. It's like a 6-month process in total, probably 3 months of that before we even thought about turning it into a feature-length project, let alone like adding a fictional element to it. And yeah, the idea just kept sticking around. We couldn't get rid of it. We knew separately that we had other pet interests in certain genres and certain settings and an aesthetic, and making something about an academic. We consider ourselves both like wannabe academics, and so that was always something we had as pretty much a separate idea. And like, okay, what would our academic be researching? And then eventually, yeah, 2 ideas became one, and it all sort of felt natural after that.
I am curious to hear more about the rabbit hole process, but maybe you can share like how your research eventually led you to Anne Laure.
Sure, yeah. Well, we briefly flirted with the idea of hiring a professional actor, and it became clear pretty early on that that was not going to work, just for a multitude of reasons. The amount of languages that the character needed to speak, the jargon, the long monologues, let alone like where they were, in New York and in Europe, and how we could work out the logistics of all of that. And so it became clear, okay, we're going to start looking for a non-actor and like an actual scholar who could carry the weight of this, a movie where she's in almost every scene or every shot, basically, except for the books. And so then we started, a large...
many books.
Many books. And so then, yeah, we started looking around at New York universities, like Columbia, NYU, it's where I go to school, et cetera, and eventually came across TED Talk that Anne Laure gave, and found a few more interviews, and I just remember she was wearing this like black turtleneck, and it just was like very clear that if we could like meet this person and see what they were actually like, and by some miracle, she responded to a crazy email that I wrote her. Thank God I like had an NYU.edu email to like get her to respond. So yeah, that was sort of the initial process, and then met her for coffee. And I don't know if you want to like take over from there.
Yeah, I'm curious how these guys explain the film to you.
It was the bizarre. I have this vivid memory that I keep feeding back to them of receiving that email and going that how your finger goes like on the delete, because you're like, oh yeah, and you're gonna ask me for $1,400 because your mother is dying. And, what is this thing? And what kept me from that is indeed the NYU connection, because you wrote that you were from the NYU Film School and you were doing an MBA. And I was like, no AI, no bot is going to come up with something like that. So that is real. And then your second line was like, we're doing an academia noir, which I believe is a genre you invented. And I thought, wow, I was in my papers and, getting rejected for the nth time of the month on, some really boring stuff. And I was like, wow, academia noir, like, tell me more. I want to know more. And that's how we got started around the conversation. But before we shot the movie, I got the script. And of course, the script doesn't give anything from what you see in the movie. I mean, it's nothing. Right?
Just says like insert 10-minute research scene here. A lot of that.
Yeah. All I can tell you is I insist on this one, I had a 12-minute monologue that they cut. And it was one shot.
Sorry
12
about that.
minutes. That's what I remember from the shooting. But the best was seeing the movie at the end. It was really, I can tell you, it was a before-after like transformation. And it's such an ode, I've said this before, but it's such an ode to research, like the music, particularly. The biggest surprise was the music. I don't know what you thought, but I think the music is a protagonist. It's the lead protagonist in this movie. And it's really the music in my head, right? And truly, if there's any researcher in the room, there's a music in our head. And, no one understands us. Like, we get paid a fourth of what we would get in the industry. But that's what happens in our head. I find it's that the strength of the movie is this ability to create that interiority that you would need normally a literature book to do, and you manage to slap that on the screen. I think that's pretty amazing. And you know what's miraculous? You came to the movie to read. Isn't that also? I think that's a feat, right? I mean, we're living in a day and age that we took screens, we took the movies into our beds, right? And you're kind of flipping that movie. I find that extremely audacious and well done.
Yeah, reading has never been more exciting than in this film, really. I mean, you mentioned the music is playing a huge role, but like I'm still like curious to hear more of like what made it click for you that this was actually a movie. I mean, most, like, if not all of the like archival materials that we see in the film are real. So like on one hand, this film takes on a kind of documentary profile. It's like almost like a research paper film in a lot of ways. But in terms of how you pace the film and how you develop the atmosphere, it then takes on this like this quality of like a mystery or even like a thriller. By the end, it feels like a horror film. Yeah, so I'm curious like how you thought about this balance in your head when you were developing the story or then communicating what you wanted to your collaborators and so on.
Yeah, like balancing like the mystery and documentary aspects of it, and yeah, it's like for some reason really hard to answer that question just because it felt like it was just unraveling sort of and unfolding, and there were so many different threads, and we were also so at the mercy of the material that took 6 months to come in. So because it was coming from all over the world, and there were a lot of dead ends and books that had nothing in them. So it like the story needed to like come to us a little bit on that front. So we were kind of waiting for it as time went by, and then there were a couple books we read that really helped us unlock, I think, what we wanted to tackle with Beatrice's psychological profile. That was a big breakthrough. And then sort of once we were like, okay, we know who this character is, and once we'd spent many hours talking about the philosophical import of the device's possible existence, once we nailed those down, which was just at some random point in the process, it was all of a sudden like, okay, this could potentially fill 90 minutes. But I don't know, I feel like that's not a satisfying answer, and I'm sorry about that.
No, what? I guess I want to hear a bit more about some of these books, because it's like very interesting in how the book or the movie guides not just what we read, but like how we read it. And I think that pacing is kind of interesting as the film goes on because it sort of reflects or inhabits Beatrice's state of mind. And I think it reaches this kind of like tipping point when certain quotations become a kind of like flicker film with this Beyond All Reason book. So I wonder if you can share more about this book in particular and how it kind of casts this kind of hold on the film, because it comes back throughout.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin found this book in particular. It is separate because it's one of I think the only book in the film that isn't directly related to the Chronovisor. It's a first-hand account, like a diaristic kind of account from a patient with schizophrenia. And so Kevin had been reading it, had found passages that he thought, were relevant to the movie.
I promise I don't read stuff like that all the time. Yeah, that was for the film. Yeah.
So that became like a helpful refrain for us for the character, and something that we thought she would connect to and want to read. And then, yeah, as far as the formal like approach to those sequences, I mean, that was also kind of happenstantial. I mean, I remember I was a psychology major in my undergraduate degree, and I remember at some point in one of the classes them displaying like a speed reading technique, where if you place a word sort of one at a time, you're able to slowly increase the pace until you're reading like 900 words a minute or significantly faster than people normally read. And that just like randomly one during one of our writing conversations came back, and we thought that could be something again relevant to her character and the way she consumes information, and also a different approach to some of the other ways we translate the books and other scenes, and to keep it fresh in that way. And I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but
well, yeah, at the time it was very important to us to like home in on the relationship that schizoid personality types or schizotypal people have to language. or just like people with right brain atrophy or left brain hypertrophy have with language. We were trying to figure out, because the film has so much language, and for reasons I won't get into, the schizophrenia was an important aspect of our research. We were like, is there a way that we can visualize, that experience that this Morag coat and Beyond All Reason communicates about her relationship to language? And we thought, when Jack brought that speed reading thing to the table, we were like, oh, that is the visual that we were looking for.
Anne Laure, are you familiar with this book?
Well, now, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious,
But-
like, how much were you actually reading these books as you were?
No, so I borrowed the Father Brune books, the Les Morts nous parlent, the dead people talk to us. I was like, I want to read that. And then I gave it back after 2 days and just fell asleep on it. It was really bad. It made me think, actually, that book made me think of Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eyes. Actually, it starts with something very similar. That effect is very cool, but I didn't know that book in particular. We talked about, I found Kevin and Jack are, so first of all, it's incredible to be directed by a duet. It's very special. It's very bizarre. But they were amazing in giving me space. So it was my first movie ever. And they gave me pointers. You were very good at giving pointers and giving a lot of room for me to decide what the character was going to say, was going to wear. I had books with me. I had all my little movie inside of my own head. And they just let that happen, which I thought was very rare. I don't know how many directors are in the room, but that was pretty awesome. So I wasn't, force-directed at all. And I felt that the whole thing, as you were saying, Kevin, a lot got resolved, maybe it's an impression, but on the set, as we were shooting. I mean, these guys there were no problems, there were only solutions. And that's really what I saw throughout the movie shooting. It was amazing, because we were under pretty tremendous constraints, whether time, budget, logistics, weather, etc. I mean, locations, everything was pretty constrained, and it didn't feel like it. It felt very free. So that was pretty amazing. So never mind about the book. What was your question?
Well, I mean, you're a professor of behavioral science,
Yes,
and
I
so
am.
like given your work on like cognition and like processing information, I was just curious to hear more about like your like process of preparing to inhabit this character who is spending most of the film reading and thinking, and
Yep.
but also having these like pretty like dense multilingual monologues.
Okay. So the multilingual it's just language, and she's a freak, right? So it's, and I hope it's conveyed well that she switches. She's like, she's a go-getter. She wants the machine. That's all. What was really interesting for me was actually I've done acting, but as a perk outside of academia, because like academia is so cerebral that acting is actually the best thing you can do when you're an academic, because you don't think, you actually work on the subtext. So the way I prepared is actually a year ago we had never met. 12 months ago we had never met, and I was in Paris. We had met on Zoom. We had seen each other remotely, and they had answered all my questions about her. Like, what does she eat? I remember you gave me pointers. They gave me, that's a funny one. They gave me, if you want like ideas of characters in cinema that we want you to be like, it's like Isabelle Huppert in The Piano Teacher. And then Kate Blanchett in Tar. I was like, easy peasy. What else? So here I am watching Tar, which I hadn't seen, and rewatching The Piano Teacher. And these characters, I was like, so I called them and I'm like, what's my sexual problem? Do I have like am I a sadomasochist, or what is the thing? What is the deal there? And they say, oh, you're an AI. So I was like, oh, well, that's a relief, yeah. And then I went on thinking like, what does an AI do? How does she make up, or doesn't make up, doesn't care about her look? All of these kind of detail where you're like, okay, do I know AI like people in academia? Absolutely. One thing we talked about was mental illness. among academics, among mathematicians. We talked about the books of, can I say, Benjamin Labatut, who is an amazing writer and wrote extensively about, those scientists who have breakthrough findings, and then, 50 years later, it's a mess. Right? They created more troubles than Grothendieck or John von Neumann, for instance, right, who invented the first computer, and look where we're at today, right? Wondering, like, was that such a good idea? So I thought those themes were much more interesting because I know of academics with mental problems, and I could think of, okay, how would they think in that situation, and just go with that. So pretty intuitive work, not very academic-y.
I have more questions, but I do want to open it up to the audience, who I'm sure also does. Please raise your hand, and a mic will come to you.
Thank you for being here. I was just wondering if you don't mind talking briefly on maybe the technical side of how you did that ending. If you don't want to, it's okay. I just thought that was so cool.
How much do we want to say about that? Not much. I mean, the one thing I can say is that, like, we shot the film on 16 millimeter. It was very important to have as much of this film feel analog and like an artifact, like one of the old dusty books or cassettes that she found. And so everything we shot in the film ultimately ended up in an analog place in terms of how we displayed it and captured it on camera. But that, I think, is all I'll say. Sorry, it's an unsatisfying answer, but we'll try to keep the magic of that scene for, at least another few days.
There was someone here who had a hand up, and then Sir will get you next.
I actually just had a related question about laptop research. And at any point did you decide we don't want to show kind of internet-based research? The internet is referenced. But even the cell phone is more a phone than a screen. So I was just curious when you thought about, kind of internet research and the avoidance of that.
There's really not much particularly interesting about the Chronovisor on the internet. Anything that is on there is redundant with just a couple of the articles that we'd ordered. And they look way better on camera, the ones that we ordered, than I think if we were filming like Wikipedia or some guy's blog or something, which is basically like the extent of the Chronovisor's information on the internet. Almost everything about it on the internet is sourced from a single article. So it just wasn't really part of the Chronovisor story, and we felt fortunate to not have to figure out how to put a screen on camera. It was a challenge we didn't really want to take up. It's way more fun to put books on camera.
Were you also scamming publishers for like contact information?
No. No lying took place. Just digging in like all the deep corners of like German eBay and like anywhere that would have a single volume of a magazine from 1972 that would be willing to ship it to us for an exorbitant amount of money. So yeah.
I think you had a question. Yep. There's a mic right behind you.
Oh. Yeah, well, given the repeated intensity of that line, where at the end she observes and records and then lays down and dies, there was perhaps a deliberate placement of a bed in the corner of the room while they're looking at the Chronovisor. I mean, was that sort of implied in your ending, or do you want to leave it open? I don't want to pin you down on that. But.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
That's just my childhood bedroom. I couldn't get the bed out of the door. Yeah.
It's documentary in different ways. Yeah.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could talk more about directing as a duo, just because it's not as common as one individual, and I feel like usually when there's a directing duo, they're brothers or a couple or something. So what? Not implying anything, but what is it like working as a team? Does one of you, do you have different specialties, or do you kind of both do everything?
Well, I mean, we've known each other since we were like 12 years old and have been making movies together pretty much that whole time. So it's kind of all we know. You know, we've done a few like small projects, either individually or working with other people, but it's sort of like the natural state of things for us. Yeah, I mean, in terms of like the division of labor or something, I feel like it just depends on the project and the subject matter, and it is, you know, so hard to pull apart who contributes what. But it is nice to have a second person on set, you know, someone to sanity check and, you know, take on something that one of us is not feeling up to at a given moment, or answer a question when the other one doesn't want to answer it, and vice versa.
What's interesting on the receiving end is they feel like one person. So it's funny. Sometimes I go like, I don't know with whom I had this conversation. You know, one of the two, right?
Together we add up to
Two-headed
one
animal.
brain. Yeah.
I have a question about it's a blend of the editing and the composing of the score. While watching this movie, I was impressed immensely at the production and how patient the two of you clearly are. And I'm curious, in the editing, how did you work with your composer to make that? Did you already have that in your mind? Did you give them an edit and say, go run and give us something? I'm curious, because the score was astounding.
Gustav Holst is talented.
Yeah, no, he's not like our composer. You know, it's a pre-existing suite, and we, you know, just edited the film to his suite. We manipulated it a little bit in order to make the editing as smooth as possible. But was that what the question was? Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I mean, yeah, the music already existed, and we were just like blessed with that suite that felt just so perfect for this movie, and probably many other movies too. But and yeah, there was a lot of test shooting that we did in order to also save on film, and so that would involve us editing an entire sequence to the music, figuring out our timing and when we should pull focus or pan or zoom, and then going back and shooting just the bits we needed on 16 millimeter, just to keep our shooting ratio as low as possible. So it was very much dictated by the music.
That kind of actually piggybacks on why I wanted to say was, one, I feel like I kind of clocked pretty early on what you guys were saying, that like the movie is a lot of just like every scene in the movie where it's like, this is what Gozer is in Ghostbusters. And so I wanted to ask, what was the decision behind choosing Holst music? Because it lends kind of a very like John Williams, you know, very portentous kind of atmosphere to everything. And then two, were there any kind of particular kind of genre movies you had in mind when you were making this, like Ghostbusters, like a Raiders, that sort of thing?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question. We definitely knew in like vague terms early on that we wanted an orchestral score for the film. Feels like something that's not that common, especially in American films in the last like 10, 15 years. We also love movies that don't have an orchestral score, but it felt like something we wanted in this case. Harkening back to a sort of era of 90s and 2000s, more genre movies, or even like, John Williams, like Harry Potter, that kind of thing. And we knew we wanted something that felt grand and had an element of like mystery and could broaden the scope of the film, which is obviously intimate in certain ways, but we wanted it to feel big in other ways. So we had that like general template in mind, and then just were listening to as much as possible. And then Kevin was the one who found the Planets suite specifically.
Yeah, our search was also narrowed by what orchestral music had sheet music in the public domain, and the recordings could be bought cheaply. That's like, that limits what you can look for. So we ended up finding it pretty fast, which was fortunate. But yeah, in terms of inspiration, definitely Harry Potter 1 and 2 are huge aesthetically for us. Nicholas Flamel and Tom Riddle's Diary, all those sequences, like really, really, like we wanted the movie to look like that. National Treasure, then there was a lot of literature, Borges, Bolaño, Umberto Eco, Robert Burton, That's anything else? Yeah.
We have time for like one last question, and we'll give it to you.
Hi, thank you so much. It seems like from what you described, the script was maybe not fully determinative of the film. I was wondering how fixed your vision of it was, despite the maybe open nature of the script, and were there things that surprised you or that you discovered through the process that helped the vision come together? Thank you so much.
Yeah, the script, even though it was technically open-ended, it was literally just like that because we didn't feel like writing out all those research sequences in script form, because we didn't have any producers that we had to prove the movie was gonna work and show them the script and stuff. It was just for us and for Anne Laure. And I'm sorry we didn't go through the trouble of helping you through with that, but it would have been a lot of work to write that. It would have been for no reason. So it just wasn't in the script, but it was totally, pre-visualized.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's very similar to what we had written in the final product. And then, of course, there were things that we found in the edit that, didn't work, or we had to, shorten a couple of Beatrice's monologues. And, for a multitude of reasons, you just figure things out, what works and doesn't work. But it definitely was, like just the fact that we didn't write those scenes out, we did know what topics were being covered in each sequence, the pacing of that, how it was going to be spread out. Like we had that pretty, ironed out by the time we were shooting.
All right, I'm sorry we're out of time, but thank you all.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.